My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. At this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, news reports share the devastating results of the accumulation and storage of victims' bodies. Photos of refrigerated trucks around hospitals such as Bellvue leave us to wonder how families may honor and bury their deceased loved ones at this time of physical distancing and social isolation. We hear of the heroics of first responders and medical personnel, but unsung among them are the devoted and caring funeral directors who are working under extreme circumstances to provide comfort to grieving families. Joining me this week on Destination Unlimited is one of those heroic funeral directors, my dear friend, Amy Cunningham. Amy Cunningham is a progressive funeral home owner, a licensed director and celebrant in Brooklyn who collaborates with New York City families to help them create the best funerals and farewells possible. She specializes in green burials in cemeteries certified by the Green Burial Council, simple burials within the New York City metropolitan area, delayed transfers and home funerals, and witnessed cremation services in Greenwood Cemetery's gorgeous crematory chapels. Filled with kind advice on how to make funerals more affordable and sustainable, Amy was profiled by the New York Times in 2014, Tricycle magazine in 2017, and named one of 9 top funeral innovators by FuneralOne, a leading voice for change in the funeral industry. In February 2018, Women's Health magazine gave Amy the unique moniker of Death Ritual Disruptor in a piece about how the daily death contemplation and awareness can enrich our lives and keep us healthier. Her website is fittingtributefunerals.com, and she joins me this week to discuss her path and how funeral professionals are dealing with this unprecedented crisis. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited my dear friend, Amy Cunningham. Welcome, Amy.
Hi, Vic. Very nice to be with you. Hi, everyone.
And so nice for you to come and join us tonight and talk about what you're doing in this world of COVID-19. But first, let's share with our listeners your path before thinking about becoming a funeral director.
I was a journalist for 35 years. I worked in city magazines and women's magazines and online publications. One of them was a website that I know you're familiar with, beliefnet.com, which was a marvelous multi-faith religion and spirituality website. And I was a healthy living blogger and enjoyed that work very much. But around the time of, we won a National Magazine Award, and that was 2007. And just about that time, my dad was in his 90s and experiencing what often happens around that time, just had some falls and became very weak and was released to hospice care. And I began a journey with him that was unforgettable and very beautiful. His courageousness at the end of his life impressed me greatly, and he was a planner. He had an arrangement for his own funeral service with the Presbyterian Church and a funeral director he knew. And in the 3 days following his death, my sister, brother, and I took his funeral plan and followed his instructions, but made it even better by infusing the ceremony with music. We worked with a local musical director, and choir volunteered, and we had a quartet and a Dixieland ensemble playing a dirge at the end that was so gorgeous. And then when they reached the sunlight of the church door, they burst into very jubilant Dixieland jazz. And that service for me seemed to so beautifully represent him and his values that I came back to Brooklyn and said to my husband one morning in the kitchen, you know, I miss Dad, and I'm sad that he's gone, but my God, that was a beautiful funeral service, and I wonder if I could help people. I wonder if I was 54 years old at that time, and we knew each other then, and I was in mortuary school 6 months after my dad's death.
Now, 54 years of age is unusual for people to start thinking about a major career change. I know I've been through several of them, but I know it's not unusual for me and not unusual for you. But what did it feel like at that time?
Oh my, I really recommend it, because in that moment I was a little bit tired of being a journalist. I was writing as well as I had ever written magazine articles, but I felt like it would be nice to completely step out of that context and try something completely different. And I'd been praying about it. I'd been going to bed at night thinking, what is it going to be? Something's coming. And I kept thinking, well, I'll just get through the caretaking with Dad and it'll come to me. And who knew that, and this is always the lesson, right? You're living, the answer is right in front of you. You just have to recognize it, right? So I was living this new life as a caretaker, and my sister, brother, and I were entering into a new kind of relationship and of coordinated caretaking. And it was a really, as painful a time as it sometimes was, it was also incredibly beautiful and sort of divinely orchestrated in a way that gave my life a kind of meaning that once I took the step into it and went deeper into the work, I could recognize who I was in a new way and release myself from the pressures of deadlines and writing. But then it was interesting because about a year into my studies in mortuary school, I began to recognize how little Americans knew about death and dying and how ill-prepared they were to manage it well and affordably in our culture. And I realized it was like the stories about end of life were on pieces of paper fluttering around in the streets. And all I had to do was lean over and pick them up and read them to people. And I began to write about and blog about the end of life period and things I was learning and what I knew now about caskets and what I knew about cremation. And it was a very liberating experience for me because all my life as a writer, I'd struggled to write and I was often blocked and so worried about, completing things. Once I became an older woman and recognized that this was an exciting new expertise I had, the writing just it was like words flew out of my fingers and I was able to find a voice and a kind of ease in my work that was very exciting to me.
Obviously a calling that was meant to be, but you had Steve Waldman, your husband, who was the founder of BeliefNet. You had two sons. What were their reaction to this decision?
I do remember Steve sat me down because I said, I think I want to go to mortuary school. And there's a school in Manhattan. It's at 11th Avenue and 54th Street. And I think at the time, the tuition now is $26,000. I think back then it was $19,000. And Steve sat me down. Our boys were in high school. And he said, listen, honey, I just want you to think this out. And this is a serious thing. I just want to make sure you're going to finish it. And this is it. And this is the path. And I said, yes, I think it is. But that was the one time he kind of confronted me with the seriousness of this next step. The boys were intrigued and impressed and very sweet to me and now are incredibly proud. So it's a good lesson as a parent that instead of telling your kids how to live, you can just live your own life and embrace a new path, and that they will be so proud of you that they'll feel parented in a way that is for you rather effortless. So
we've got about a minute left in this segment. Just tell our listeners a little bit about what mortuary school was like.
Mortuary school is surprisingly tough academically. It's a lot of test prep and rote memorization, and that part of my brain had never really been exercised, but it was worth doing. I would recommend it to anyone who's interested in end-of-life issues and care of the dead and funeral planning and funeral ceremony. But it was surprisingly rigorous, and it took just about everything I had, lots of late nights, lots of homework, and lots of test preparation.
Absolutely. My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Amy Cunningham, my dear friend. We're talking about her career in mortuary sciences and as a funeral director, and also about how things are happening right now in the time of COVID. We'll be back with more of Amy after these words on the OMTimes radio network.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. That's right. They can help save lives by simply washing their hands. Just 20 seconds of thorough hand washing after they've coughed or sneezed or been outside can help fight against the dastardly spread of germs. Armed with only soap and water and hands, your superhero can protect you, your family, and everyone out there in America land. Amazing! Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
The student asks the teacher, "How do I experience transformation?" The teacher replies, "When the student is ready to receive deeper answers, the student then asks, 'How do I know what deeper questions to ask?' And the teacher replies, "When the student decides to commit to a practice inviting transformation, level 2 questions will be revealed." Hi, I'm Tomas Garza, and as a teacher and host, I'm inviting listeners to enroll in the mastery of transformation by joining me on Decide to Transform, your bridge to level 2 answers. Tuesdays, 1 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this evening is my dear friend Amy Cunningham, and we're talking about funerals, and especially funerals at this time of COVID-19. I know that you studied with Henry Frisco Weiss, who was a guest on my show a couple of years ago, on becoming a death doula. What is a death doula?
A death doula is a non-medical spiritual support person on your team when you have a member of the family who is nearing the final weeks and days of their life. And doulas can be, just as birth doulas are there when a woman is entering labor, so too if we think of death as a kind of labor, a doula is there to help around the house, help with legacy planning and projects that would be uplifting to everyone in the house. And it's a real movement now, and so many talented men and women are entering into this kind of work and finding it incredibly fulfilling. For me, as a licensed funeral director now, I took the doula training just to enrich and enlarge my scope and understanding of the whole end of life period.
And what are some of the things that the death doula brings to the family?
Oh, mostly just comfort and a kind of serenity and a kind of, they accompany, and they're just there to listen and acknowledge that this is difficult, but that people have been doing this for thousands of years, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's some very lovely and traditional things to do with music and storytelling. So doulas are just become a member of the family for a very intense period of time. And many Americans find them incredibly supportive.
So doulas are extending to the family, so to speak, spiritual assistance and guidance, which would not normally be done by a funeral director.
Yes, that's right. Funeral directors still are the caretakers after death occurs. A funeral director might enter into your life prior to any death in the family and give you advice, sometimes legal advice or a little bit of strategy on how to make some important decisions and talk about the difference between cremation and burial, the different kinds of services you can have, what you could skip, but what is also important. So they're there for you, but they truly become quite important. And in some states of the United States today, they're required. And New York, by the way, is one of the 8 most conservative states in the United States in terms of insisting upon a funeral director's involvement in the registering of the death certificate and the making of the funeral plans.
What was your original vision for the work that you're doing as a funeral director? I'm sure you had these ideas as you were going through your training.
Mm-hmm.
What were you projecting into the future? What were you seeing?
Initially, going off that experience that I had with my dad's service, I just felt that people shouldn't minimize funerals and that they should sort of find their way to their own original kind of event that, as you know, statistically, there's a rising rate of secularism. I don't really see it as secularism, though, Vic, and I bet you don't either. I feel like people are intermarrying and that they are no less religious, really. We talk about the spiritual and not religious. I think folks are just mixing it up in the American family system today, and that they have more than one faith operating within the household, often very compatibly, and that they're interested in a lot of different religious ideas, and they might, some people think of it as a culturally appropriating material, but I find it just so exciting to learn about the customs of other people and practice and experiment with different ways of finding the divine. So, long story short, a funeral director is often very knowledgeable about different ways, different cultures over the history of civilization have honored the dead and separated from each other. So I found through the funeral my own special ministry and a way to counsel folks on, and often, this is fun, in Brooklyn, where I work, when I meet with a family these days to plan an end-of-life ceremony, let's say a grandmother is in hospice care now and nearing the end of her life, the family might meet with me to draw up some plans and find out how much things are going to cost. And that family at the table is often one person on my right will be Jewish, the person next to them will be a lapsed Catholic, someone's going to yoga and going to Buddhist meditation retreats, all in the same family, all at the same conference table, all planning a funeral for grandma, who may not have been very religious at all until she was in the nursing home and fell in love with the Mormon chaplain and ended her final days pronouncing herself a Mormon. And there's the family with me trying to figure out what the funeral is going to be. And it's actually when I meet a family like that, which is over and over again, almost weekly, I feel like I'm in such a sweet spot, able to really support people and normalize what they're experiencing, because they may feel confused when actually I tell them, you're just entirely normal and welcome. We are going to plan a beautiful event.
That's wonderful. Now, you aspired in your early career and continue to do what's known as a green funeral. Please tell our listeners what a green funeral is.
The funeral industry is an $18 billion industry, and it had become rather commercial. And a lot of the products being sold, particularly with caskets, were not very sustainable or eco-friendly or green. So I help people see the way to choose a casket that will biodegrade into the soil, a willow casket, a pine casket, just simple boxes that are very elegant and nice. And then if it's an urn, it's the same sort of materials, or I help them see that they don't necessarily need to have a formaldehyde chemical embalming, that there are ways to have a viewing with ice and keeping the body cool. And we can be very creative and have a service where a person's values and belief that the planet is sacred can die in a way that they live and treasure the earth from which we sprang.
So you're dealing with the use of sustainable materials for either the casket or the urn. You're trying to avoid chemical embalming and instead just use ice to preserve the body. I know in the Jewish tradition, number one, the funeral is supposed to be conducted, the burial is supposed to be conducted within the next day of the person passing away. And that also the coffin is a plain wooden coffin with no metal so that it too can decompose. So in actuality, the traditional Jewish funeral was already a green funeral.
That's right. And also the the Muslim funeral is also very green. And the body is returned to the soil, just wrapped in a shroud, facing Mecca. And sustainability and or stewardship of the earth is considered a religious value and an important tenet of the faith.
I assume that in the position that you work in what you do, you have to be comfortable with death. How did you become so comfortable with death?
I don't know that I quickly was, and I wouldn't say that I am today. I do find deceased people remind me of babies or infants. I feel like they sort of return to a kind of gentle, a kind of innocence. So death isn't scary when you're really confronting it, I've found. Of course, now, not every death is beautiful. There are car accidents and crimes that cause death to seem very violent and unfair. So I have matured as I've worked with different kinds of cases in understanding just how complex and rich this material is and how grief can be eventually perceived as a kind of unasked for, unrequested wisdom. We see things that we didn't think we could tolerate seeing, but we manage, and through the companionship of others and the reflection and, of course, a lot of reading in spiritual poetry and books are so wonderful to review that we find our way to manage a kind of familiarity with death. I think there's still a little seed of fear still there, but that I find useful to examine and analyze.
My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Amy Cunningham. Amy is a funeral director, a green funeral director, and she's one of my heroes at this time here, especially in New York City, where there are so many people passing from the COVID-19 pandemic and families trying to deal with their passing. We're going to talk more about that later in the show. Amy, please tell our listeners where they can find out more about you and the work that you do.
I have a blog called theinspiredfuneral.com, inspiredfuneral.com, where I am currently blogging a lot about COVID-19 this novel coronavirus that is plaguing us at this moment and causing so much death to occur in urban areas and now the suburbs and now soon the rural areas as well. So I have a lot of information there, and I also have a website called fittingtributefunerals.com, and there I write about green burial and the different kinds of cremation options you can select and review.
And we'll be back with more of Amy after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
You're listening to OTR FM, part of the IOM Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. They can help save lives by not having play dates. That's right. By replacing get-togethers with virtual play dates and video chats, they can help slow the evil spread of germs. And if your superheroes do go outside, make sure they continue their superhero wing by staying 6 feet away from others to protect everyone in America land. Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
Hello, I'm Lisa Berry. Join me every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for Light on Living. A chance to see new, hear different, and feel more as I shine the spotlight on all the ways to lighten the load of life's challenges. Light on Living is your link to that new way you're looking for, that new understanding that will enhance your life, and that positive connection that will support your growth. So join me and you'll gain insight and start to see things in a new way that motivates you.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
Adopt US Kids presents Multiple Choice Parenting.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes?
How could he do this to you? And for Sheila, she has split ends.
B, console her.
Oh, sweetie, this is going to happen a lot. 4, maybe 5 more times before you get married.
C, take charge.
Got to get this all straightened out. Give a little talking to, man to man, mano a mano. Hey, Steve! Is now a good time? No? Okay, no problem. Bye.
Or D, help her find a new boyfriend.
I know a great place to meet boys. The internet. Nice, single boys. Never mind. How about some ice cream?
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information on how you can adopt, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, my dear friend Amy Cunningham. We're talking about the funeral industry, especially at this time, and especially about here in New York City. Amy, what do you think is the most sacred part of the funeral?
Oh, Vic, that's an amazing question. That's a beautiful question. I think the presence of the body in some shape, way, or form. It doesn't mean that the body needs to be in an open casket, openly viewed, but I think there's a beautiful passage by Rudolf Steiner where he says the importance of a funeral is, and I'm going to paraphrase his beautiful language, but he said, as the clergy or the celebrant is there, as the casket is there, and the family's in the room, there's a parallel celestial event occurring simultaneously, and that the angels are welcoming the soul of the deceased as the friends and relatives are saying goodbye, and that this kind of tree-like rooted structure of the ceremony is extremely important. So I think about that, and having the body present, even if it's in a closed casket, is very, very valuable.
Absolutely. I would strongly suggest to our listeners that they Google and look at the work of Rudolf Steiner, who was the father of anthroposophic medicine, which is really fascinating in and of itself, and a very spiritual person, and his work is really amazing. He is the one who is responsible for the foundation of what is known as the Waldorf type of education, the Waldorf schools. So getting back to what we're talking about, I'm going to share a personal story. Lori Sue and I will always be grateful to you for taking on her mom's funeral in 2018. And one of the most memorable parts of that was the bedside ritual that you led while we were there, while her nieces and nephews and her other daughter, Ricky, was there, and we were all around the bedside. And I remember how wonderful it was for me to participate and to pray, and also to anoint her feet with oil, which I just felt naturally called to do. I thought it was an important thing to do. Why are bedside rituals so important to the sanctity of death, and how do they help the mourner?
I think they allow us to see the beauty of death and the liberation and release, and hold our sadness and sometimes despair, grief, that they are no longer with us in the same way, but to stay with that moment and deepen it through activities like those you just described is a wonderful way to see that there is a kind of life after death that you can hold in your heart, and that the relationship will continue. And just by staying in the room to shroud the body, bathe, comb the hair, do those kinds of things, is a way of overcoming our own anxieties and preparing for our own death, I think.
Absolutely. I know that I shared with you that my listeners know my mom passed in January of this year. And my sister and I had the privilege of being with her at her bedside. And one of the things that my mother used to do, there was a song by Bobby Goldsboro in the 1960s. My dad died back then in 1968. And there was a song by Bobby Goldsboro called Honey. And the lyric went, "And honey, I miss you, and I'm being good, and I long to be with you if only I could." And I sang that song to her, and she was in a coma, but I know that people in coma can hear us.
Yes.
And I sang that song to her, and then I said, "Daddy's there, your honey's waiting for you, go to him." And she passed shortly thereafter. It was a really, really beautiful send-off.
Yeah, these moments are so precious, and we can find ways to access them at different points. You know, some of us may not be in the same city with our loved one when they die for whatever reason, and we should never feel guilty about that. There are other ways to access the relationship again and feel connected. So however it is, it's never the same. And as much as you read about it, it won't be the same way as the description someone else is going to narrate. But if you keep your mind expanded and kind of open and aware to whatever is, death can truly be transformative, and as sad a time as it is, we can find a way to grow.
Now, Lori's mother's funeral was pre-planned with you well in advance. How important is pre-planning in normal times to easing this process?
Well, it's a good idea to rehearse, right? And it's a good idea to have kind of a script or a structure. We can make it up as we go, but it's always a relief to have something on paper. So I love it when I meet with people. Increasingly, with baby boomers, I'm meeting with the dying person before they die. And that's even more wonderful and sacred and amazing, to have conversations with the dying and find out from them directly what it is they want. And often it's something very simple.
How frequently are people asking for cremation these days?
Cremation surpassed the rate of burial in the United States in 2016 and is, if you look at charts of the rate of cremation, it's going up at a fairly sharp angle. I think this is because cremation generally tends to be less expensive, and there's also a flexibility to it. Folks find that they can have a cremation and then a scattering service later, sometimes in the summer when the whole family can get together. And I think cremation is fine. I have ideas about ways to improve it, but I don't want people to forget about burial because I think burial is kinder to the environment and can be affordably managed.
There are traditions that do not permit cremation, is that correct?
Yes, although that's changing too, Vic. I think a lot of rabbis, Judaism has never found cremation in any way appealing. I think there are 3 or 4 cremations in the Old Testament, all of them negatively portrayed. It seems to Jewish people and to Muslims a desecration. However, if you speak to someone who is Hindu, the fire is an element that is extremely spiritual and important. So different faith traditions have different types of funerals that they strongly feel are correct.
100 years ago or so, home funerals were fairly common. How prevalent are those today, and will they become more so in the future?
I think home funerals are great, but what you described that we did at the bedside with your mother-in-law is a kind of home-based delayed transfer. All we're doing in that situation, and that's what I'm seeing becoming quite a bit more common, is people taking their time before the funeral director arrives to transport the deceased person out of the home or out of the place of death, out of the hospital. So to know that we can be present and take our time in those hours is very important. There are people who really want a long time and use dry ice to keep the body cool in the house, often when a death is supervised by hospice. And I've had home funerals lasting as long as 3 days in New York City that have been incredibly satisfactory to the families and quite surprising to the guests who visit during that time in a lovely kind of way.
So is that sort of like a combination of a wake and funeral at home?
Mm-hmm. It's like a return to like an Irish wake. With sometimes we have music in the house or food, children. It can be really quite an extraordinary celebration of the life and a farewell to the physical body, all in the home where people feel most comfortable.
How much do you interface with clergy in the preparation of a funeral?
About half the time, I guess. New York City still, we have a lot of wonderful ministers, rabbis, and faith leaders who are interested in new kinds of family traditions and very open and flexible. And so I work with clergy quite a lot, but there are secular celebrants in my life as well who have a way of helping out those families who haven't been going to a house of worship every week. It's nice to have a leader. I also have worked with families who have marvelously planned and invited guests to a service that they themselves led and felt very good about. Everybody's different, but it has the funerals I see. It's amazing how well people get along and how much love is exchanged in these rituals, as long as people, decide to do something. There is a crowd that doesn't want anything at all, and I work with them a little bit to show that doing something is awfully nice. A friend of mine had an experience with a dying mother who said to the family at the end of her life, "If you give me a funeral, I'm going to haunt you. I don't want any kind of service." And so they didn't give her a funeral. And my friend later said, that was a really bad move. I feel like we should have had a funeral, even though Mom had told us not to have one, because it felt like it was Mother's last deprivation and that we needed a service. And, that I said, well, it's not too late. You can still have a kind of farewelling. So we all find our way through these experiences, and I feel like we get better at them as we age. Mm-hmm. I meet people and I teach folks about different opportunities the funeral provides, and sometimes they come up to me after the class and they say, "Oh, I wish I'd known this from my mother's funeral because it was not the way I wanted it to be, and I feel, now that I know what I could have had, I feel awful." And I always tell them, "Oh, please, there's going to be another chance. We're going to work at this for the rest of our lives, and you're right where you ought to be."
Absolutely.
And you will get to that service and grow and finally prepare for your own.
Absolutely. My guest is Amy Cunningham. She's a personal dear friend and also a funeral director here in New York City. After the break, we'll talk about the current COVID-19 situation and how it is affecting the funeral industry. We'll be back with more after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting. A teenager. Learning the lingo.
Today I'm going to help parents translate teen slang. Now, when a teen says something is on fleek, it's exactly like saying, "That's rad." It simply means that something is awesome or cool. Another one is totes. It's exactly like saying, "Totally," just shorter. As in, "I totes love going to the mall with Becca." Another word you might hear is jelly. Jelly is a shorter, better way to say jealous. As in, "Chloe, I am like so jelly of your unicorn phone case."
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will think you're, rad just the same. To learn more, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
They say singing can help you remember things, so here's some tips for parents out there during these tough times.
Number 1.
Make sure your kids wash their hands for 20 seconds after they've coughed or sneezed or been outside.
2.
Virtual playdates, social and physical distancing can help save lives.
3.
Tell them they're safe and show your love and pride. Yes, we'll get through this together. Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, my dear friend Amy Cunningham, a funeral director here in New York City. We're talking about funerals. Amy, what can we learn about funerals today that we can take into the future of funerals?
That's the question of the hour, Vic. The situation in New York City right now, with the many thousands of deaths due to the COVID-19 crisis, is that a lot of families are calling funeral directors because there was no planning. They didn't anticipate these deaths. Thousands of people have died in the city without funeral arrangements, with families sometimes who can't really afford a funeral. And they need to scramble to find help with the cremation or the burial. There's so many callers that they've overwhelmed the system, and many are seeking the lowest priced, understandably, the lowest priced cremation, which is the direct cremation, where the funeral director comes to the hospital, the medical examiner's office, or the home at the time of death and transfers the body, and then places it lovingly into a simple cremation container, takes it to the crematory after filing some documents. And these crematories in the New York City area are completely overwhelmed today. They can only move so fast. So there's a kind of a traffic jam right now. And I was hearing this is changing by the day. Perhaps even by the time your show airs, there will be more news stories in the paper. But I'm finding that a lot of the callers who seek services from my funeral firm, I cannot help, nor can I find a funeral home to refer them to. And this is merely a temporary thing caused by the sheer volume of the deaths from the novel coronavirus. So you're taping this program at a moment of incredible sadness in this city, an unexpected an event that will cause us to look at the funeral in a new way and in ways I haven't yet figured out myself. I know when it causes us to go back to the Civil War, when after the major battles we had thousands of dead men in the battlefields whose burials we had to quickly arrange. Another major event in the history of the American funeral was the days of AIDS, when men and women were dying in the primes of their lives and very disenchanted with the church, sometimes disenfranchised from their own families and unable to get the support and help around end-of-life events that they needed. So then also 9/11 was a major passage in the history of funeral service in New York City. So we're in a historic moment as we speak, and many, many people are trying to figure out what to do. I think what's going to happen is that the city will be burying quite a few people in what we called our Potter's Field off the shores of the Bronx on an island called Hart Island. And it's my hope that they will make the island a real city cemetery that is visitable and beautiful and amazing, and that this moment of sadness in New York City will cause our community to rise up and together come up with creative ways to solve what will be a tremendous amount of grief in the city. And I think we can help each other and seize the moment and make it meaningful. But as we're speaking today, there's a tremendous amount of sadness in the city we live in.
Absolutely. I alluded to this in the introduction of the program, but there are refrigerated trucks in various areas, including adjacent to the East River by the Bellvue Hospital, that are filled with bodies that they really can't do anything with.
Yes. I don't want people to get too worried about bodies getting lost, because I believe in my heart, and everything I've observed with my colleagues is that the bodies are very carefully labeled and respectfully wrapped. They're covered and in a pouch. But we also there's still a potential risk of some, perhaps we don't even have the science yet to know. Most viruses die at death, but there's some need for understanding how long a body can test positive. So the anxiety around that possibility that perhaps for a half day, hours, or some period of time that person might still be contagious in some way, has totally caused the funeral industry to rise up in a kind of high gear, and we're just trying to organize and manage the bodies as safely as we can, protecting the health of our workers as well as the grief of the people whose loved ones are now gone.
To the extent that you can, please share with our listeners one of the events that you've been involved with recently. I know you've been running around all over the place helping families. Give us an example of one, please.
Well, I've had very good experiences with burials upstate. When you go outside of the 5 boroughs of New York, there are cemeteries that are very affordable, very pretty, and I take deceased people in simple pine boxes, some of them dead of the COVID-19 virus, and standing at a safe distance from one another, wearing our masks and sometimes our gloves. We have lovely services and poignant ones because there's generally a lot less hugging, and we've had lovely gravesides with music, singing, and grieving families standing around the open grave.
And you have personally transported some of these bodies yourself, correct?
Yes, I have a nice Honda Pilot with about a 78-inch bay in the back, and I put an oriental rug back there, and it holds a pine box very nicely. So tomorrow I'm going to Philadelphia to pick up a deceased gentleman who died of COVID-19 down there and bring him up here for his Jewish burial service on Friday. So in my own small way, one deceased person at a time, I'm trying to make a difference and give families the best kind of services and the most affordable services that I can.
Amy, I started by saying you are my hero. You are absolutely my hero. I am so amazed, and just not amazed because I know the type of person that you are, but just so blown away by what you're doing. Thank you for what you're doing.
Well, it feels like it's a gift to me and an honor, to move from one ecstatic space to the next and to learn the stories of people's lives and how they managed adversity. It's amazingly inspiring. I just love my work. I really do.
Obviously, that is obvious to anyone who knows you. Now, what are some of the rituals that families may engage in during this period of physical distancing and isolation?
One ritual, there's several things I want to say here. We're seeing ways to warm up technology and make it more spiritual. I'm very excited about Zoom, the conferencing platform, and its possibilities for memorial services, eulogies, and events in honor of those we've lost. I try to stay away from that language, by the way, those we've lost. They're no longer with us the way they were, but they're really not lost to us. I feel like they're very, very available. So we all need to work on new language around death and dying that will have a positive message attached to it. Also, there are ways that we can bring the dead into our daily lives. I love altars, or we don't have to call them altars. We can call them memorial tables in the home, where you could put photographs of the person you're missing and candles, objects, and have a space in your home as we're all hunkered down in our residences, trying to keep a safe distance from each other. There are ways we can remember the dead in that way. Also, I love Ancestor Walls and hanging pictures in one particular area of the house of all your beloved ancestors and relatives, and even authors, people who changed your life, and remember the dead in that way. I took a workshop once with a gentleman who said you can bring the dead into your life by finding something that they wrote in their own handwriting and reading it aloud. So if you have any letters that your mother wrote to you when you were in summer camp or at college, bring those out and read them. Find those documents that remind you. Of course, photos are so important. And now we can digitalize all this material and put it online on platforms like lifeposts.com. There's another new one called gatheringus.com. These are wonderful platforms that allow you to tell a life story. And we didn't used to have that kind of thing. And we now have our cell phones, which are amazing records of our own lives and the times we've shared with others. So we have so much data available.
My dear friend and my hero, Amy Cunningham. Amy, please tell our listeners one more time how they can find out more about you and this amazing work that you do.
Oh, thank you. I have a blog called theinspiredfuneral.com and a website, fittingtributefunerals.com. And I just always love to speak to people and hear their stories. And I'm getting a lot of mail now. I may not be quick at answering it, but you can find me on Facebook, of course, and Instagram.
Amy, my love to you and Steve and the boys, and just thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you, Vic. You're great to talk to. I'll come back to your show anytime. There's so much to discuss, right?
Absolutely. And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.